is R Rats with Team 4545 League, analyzing the game between Kid Rattler and Chess Boy. This was submitted in Week 6 of Team 53 for Game of the Week. Let's have a look and see what happens. Okay, been here many times before. In extremely intriguing position in John Watson's classic book, English 1... Pawn to King 4, one of his 4-volume set, written about 30 plus years ago. He had an extensive chapter on this line, and F5 is a really interesting line for both sides of the board. Watson wasn't entirely sure what was going on in all of them. Complex, and I've spent a lot of time analyzing this. This was one of my old lines against the English opening, but Black doesn't play this. He plays Knight F6, and now this is another extremely interesting move. A lot of theory, particularly in Watson's book, frowns on it, and the drawback is that White is eventually going to gain this tempo on that bishop with E3 and D4. But in practice, it actually doesn't turn out that way. That bishop C5 move holds up. It's probably better, if you're going to put the bishop out anywhere, is to put it on B4. And in a lot of lines that get complex, Black will double White's pawns, and all these variations are beyond the scope of this video. The English is one of these openings that is just off main. Most common theory of openings that people are going to be prepared for. I used to use the English in correspondence play when I was active from 1986 to 2001. I used it extensively and tend to know quite a bit about it. It's not something I'm playing anymore, but it's definitely one to get Black out of a lot of the openings he's most comfortable with. And when you play C4 regularly, you will find just about everything gets played against it, and you can have some fun with all the myriad of complications. So anyway, bishop C5 isn't always the best, but it holds up. It can hold up in practice, and there's actually some lines where White can get in trouble with this, and I don't in similar themes to what we're going to have, but it's kind of a shame. Black just throws his game away here real quick with a mistake. But let's look at candidate moves here for Black. Castling, nothing wrong with castling. If you castle, you get the king out of the way, you get the rook developed, and you just continue on your way and make White demonstrate what he can do with this opening. The other thing you can do is you might want to try to think about preserving this bishop, and there's two ways to do it: pawn A5 and pawn A6. The point is, at some point D4 is going to come, and now the bishop has an extra square to go to, and Black's got some pressure on D4, and Black might even at some point, not yet, but be playing for D5, and to keep that pawn on D4 where it can be a target and not be able to be defended by a pawn at all. Now Black's not ready for that, obviously, but it's a plan to go for in this type of position. So either one of those moves would have been fine, but Black plays impulsively. He violates one of the things I preach over and over again in these videos: slow down. Don't play impulsive chess. Black spent just here. Watch his clock. Okay. He goes up 4 seconds. So he spent 41 seconds on this move. Now, he had extra time, because remember, he starts with 45 minutes. If he had stopped and thought for a little bit and analyzed, instead of just playing impulsively, it's like what I call hope chess. You're hoping your opponent does what you want him to do. Black sees that he attacks a pawn and develops a piece. White has to guard the pawn. Well, White doesn't have to guard the pawn. White has tactics. And the whole theme revolves on what I said is supposed to be wrong with bishop c5. I've given away, but pause the video. Solve it. Okay, you've come back. I hope you've solved it. Just d4. d4 does it. And Black moves kind of quickly, about 50 seconds on that move, and then all of a sudden Black stops and takes his time. He realizes, oops, I've made a mistake. And I've had you solve it. You already see what's happening. And now black spends about 5 minutes on that move and retreats the bishop, and now the winning move is available right there for white. It just pawn fork, okay? And if this was a grandmaster game, the game is ending right now. Black's going to resign because he knows that it's hopeless and there's no point in playing on. And it's a respectable thing to do. But this being amateur chess, yeah, we're going to play it out. So, well, we've dropped a pawn. What are we going to do? We got to hunker down somehow and try and sort this mess out. But before I do this, let me just show you one thing I was looking at. Once you realize you're going to drop the pawn, black only got a pawn for it. Could he try for 2? Well, here, I'll show you. He can get 2 pawns, but it runs into a drawback. And I'll show you what it is. White happily trades queens. And black's got this wonderful 4-on-2 majority, although it's somewhat neutralized by the fact he has double pawns, but he's not going to have double pawns for long. He's going to have triple pawns. And if it weren't for that move, maybe black can generate something with those pawns down the line. We've seen it happen in some of these other league games where one side was down a piece. But anyway, it didn't happen here. But really, black has no hope here. His pawns are just going to be targets. There's nothing he can do. So let's just go into the continuation. And here, black chooses a puzzling option. He plays knight a5. Now, he's not really attacking the pawn. We'll get to that in a moment. But why do it from the side of the board? I mean, just suppose white just stops and guards that pawn. Okay, let's just think this out logically. Suppose white stops and guards the pawn. Your knight's on the rim. How's it going to get back into play? Well, it's not. Not yet. It's going to take a while, too. We're probably going to have to get back into play by way of b7. And that pawn on b7 isn't going anywhere until that bishop goes somewhere. So it's going to take black a while to get that knight back into play. So why not just, if you're going to keep it, why not put it on e5? Am I missing something? If it's kicked again, okay, if white kicks f4, he can't castle kingside, and the knight just goes to g6. Well, we might have to watch out for another fork. But if anything, we have d7 to fall back on. I mean, just putting pieces on the side of the board is just, unless there's a definite purpose to it, it just doesn't help your game. Okay, let's get to the main line. Okay, so knight a5. And now we've got to take the bishop or it'll run away. And now black has 1 pawn for the piece. That's all he's got. And white plays knight f4. Now, I'm going to criticize this move. Okay, let's go back. Okay. The reason I'm criticizing it is it's moving a piece that's already developed. There's nothing wrong with it there. What's the one thing I preach in all these games, videos I do? It's development. You got to get your pieces out. If you don't get your pieces out, you're in trouble. White is not threatening, or black is not threatening this pawn on c4. Okay? Let me just show you. Now the logical move is just castle. It develops the king, gets him out of the way. He's safe. He's secure. The rook on h1 is developed. Everything's fine. And black is not threatening this pawn. Okay, I said I'd get to it because white has a tactic, winning it right back, winning the piece. So, although knight f4 has a threat, it's just and theoretically it's nothing wrong with it. The problem I see is it's just a second best move. And if you keep making second best moves, eventually your opponent can get back in the game. And that's what can happen. So, anyway, black has to stop and deal with it. And now white's game is still fine, but now this pawn is threatened. But white could have, the knight could have been on e2. Now he could be getting this bishop developed, or holding on to that pawn if he felt the need. And b3, putting it on the long diagonal. There's nothing wrong with this. And anyway, it's like I say, I'm not being too harsh on knight f4. I'm just saying, always try and find a better move. And in light of everything else, the developing move is just about always good. You don't need to rush to attack and win the game always. Okay, so knight e4, and there's nothing wrong with making exchanges. If anything, go to G5, and maybe we can do some tactics on E6 and get a bishop D5 pin in. White's still fine. He's not, knight F4 didn't cost him anything. But now black starts going bonkers, as I say. What's the point of rook B8? The point of rook B8, as I can see it, is black wants to take the pawn on C4, which white hasn't bothered to defend, but he doesn't want to lose his pawn on B7. Well, fine, okay? Let's go back to my number one rule, development. Let's put the rook on E8. Now, if white just develops that, or protects that pawn, well, black admits his mistake, puts the knight back on C6, and it gets into play later, okay? Right? Okay? But at least, look, black's got his pieces developed. His whole development is complete, and white's isn't. Here's those guys I talk about so many times, the rook on A1 and the bishop on C1. What are they doing there? They're not in the game. You got to get those guys out of your giving odds of a rook and bishop, and I'm going to keep talking about it because it happens so often. But here, even though black's down a piece and has a lost game, at least he's got his development completed, okay? White doesn't. Okay? So let's just go back and rook B8, and white happily makes exchanges, because the more exchanges that happen, the quicker you end up winning this. And now he stops and secures the pawn, opens up a nice diagonal, and there's going to be some tactics on E6, although we're not ready for them. It'll end up, instead of being up a piece for the pawn, we'll just be ahead in exchange, and that helps black out a lot. I'll just show you here in a second. For instance, if knight takes, and we can't take with the queen, bishop D5, but if rook takes, bishop here and knight back, then you're going to kick this bishop out, and black's only down the exchange instead of down a piece, and that's better than being down a piece for a pawn. Even though the pawn count is the same, trust me, it's better because you have an equal number of pieces. Here you have a lesser number of pieces, and that's counting all your pieces as one. Let's just look here. Black has, in this position, black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces. How many does white have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But if you do this combination, as I said, like I say, you just don't have enough in here. You have pins, but now count the pieces. White has 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're all at home. And black has 1, 2, 3, 4. So black's got the same number of pieces now. Okay, there's a difference. That's why it's better to be down the exchange than down a piece for two pawn, or down a piece for a pawn. Okay, so let's get to the main line. And white just continues his development. Finally, got him. Rook F5. And now, unfortunately, the tactic now works. Black can't take on E6 because he's going to lose his queen. And that's what he does. Well, he's not going to lose his queen, but he's going to... But actually, let's see. What's happened is... Oh, yeah, we've got that fork. That's the right... See, White's able to do it this way because he's going to win the piece back on C6. Here black's only down the exchange, but white's going to win a piece, the piece back. And now black's just up down a whole rook. And there's really not much hope now. White just continues his development, and wow, that king's in serious trouble. Those diagonals are killing black, and well, that's okay. Check. Sometimes just the subtle moves work great. You're not threatening anything here directly, but you are indirectly. Let's just burn a move. Here it is. Whoops. Check. Well, that's not checkmate, because he can throw. Why isn't that checkmate? What am I missing? Oh, it's going to be checkmate. Duh. I was thinking it's a mate in one. Okay. checking is fine. Now he just transposed into it, and really there's no hope for black. And black just plays on and lets white checkmate him. But the time spent, the game was over quickly. All the things we've talked about in many league games before, moving too quick, not making candidate moves, playing impulsively, all these things are cost black the game. And White played a fine game. I can't really criticize his play at all. He did what he did, but black certainly had a few different options aside from missing the tactic by playing bishop e6, putting the knight on the side of the board and playing rook b8 didn't really help him, and then he just got a little bit overwhelmed by the tactics that white had at his disposal on e6. So, interesting game. I want to thank everyone for having a look. I think there's something to learn from it. I thank everyone for their time, and we'll talk to you soon with another video. Take care.